Hi there, I'm Doy Santos, and on this edition of The Cusp, we're going to be asking the question: is the opposition drawing the wrong lessons from recent elections? And are they committing the same mistakes now, which could potentially make them obsolete in the future? What lessons have the opposition taken away from the last two elections of 2016 and 19? Are they the right ones? What lessons could they have drawn but are refusing to because it would mean admitting some painful truths to themselves? And what are the implications for the future if they don't learn them? As Congress opened just a week or so ago, the opposition was licking its wounds from the recent beating it took at the polls. None from its senatorial slate were elected to the upper house, not even re-electionist Bam Aquino, or former Senator Mar Rojas, who lost to President Duterte in 2016. At the lower house, they've been reduced to 18 members, whom you could fit in the back of a Toyota Hiace. Following this electoral rout, the opposition doesn't seem to show signs of internal examination. They don't seem interested in taking stock of just what happened, so they can make the necessary changes moving forward. The reason for this seems to be that they've taken away the wrong message from the electorate. Here are what I believe to be the wrong lessons that the opposition has drawn from the last two elections, starting with number one: that it was black propaganda that destroyed them at the polls, which must now be met and countered with their own black propaganda, or what I would call, when they go low, we go lower. Ask anyone from the yellow camp why they lost, and they might say it was Duterte's troll army spreading fake news on Facebook and other social media outlets, inflating the role that SOCMED plays in Philippine politics. Yet the previous administration in 2016 had a massive war chest, political machinery, and propaganda outlets at its disposal. This may have helped Mr. Rojas, who was perennially at fourth place, to reach second on election day. Some say that the COMELEC played a part in this. We still don't know the full extent, of course, as its former chair, Andres Bautista, an Aquino appointee, went into hiding following allegations that he had amassed for himself a huge pile of hidden wealth. In 2019, we saw the anonymous Picoy videos spreading fake news, which went viral over the internet, seeking to discredit the president and by extension his Senate ticket. Did the opposition stage this, as the man who now claims to be Picoy says they did? Recently, a certain person by the name of Dennis Bourbon was arrested for seeking to scam Solons by pretending to be a local official in need of financial help. Bourbon claims to have been paid by senatorial candidates of the opposition at the last election to besmirch administration candidates. Did the opposition try its own hand in the dark arts? I'd like to narrate a conversation I had with a former staff member of one of these senatorial candidates who worked in the vice president's office at the time. This was a few years ago. I had shared with him my former association with Kokoy Dayao, a blogger who went into hiding following the expose linking him to several websites that were critical of Duterte. Silent No More PH being the most prominent one. Kokoy, to his credit, when he recruited me to contribute to the Pro-Pinoy project in 2010, following the election of Pinoy, never interfered with my writing in that site, even when I wrote critical, even scathing pieces on the administration's performance from 2010 up to 2014. It was during the 2016 election that I parted ways with Kokoy. He was then actively supporting Mar Rojas, and I was writing stuff critical of him. It was then that he began trading barbs with me on Twitter, which I noticed started becoming slightly a bit offensive in tone. It was later revealed through the Senate hearings that he was being paid by the Presidential Communications Office as a consultant, supposedly for his work as a propagandist at that time. Anyway, the staff member of the vice president to whom I was recounting this expressed frustration with Kokoy for being so quote unquote stupid. Nakakainis yung Kokoy na yan, he told me. Why? I asked. Kasi nahuli siya, he told me. He was so stupid to leave information on his website that could identify him as the principal owner. In other words, he was stupid for not covering up his tracks well enough. So I thought to myself, oh, so from your point of view, what Kokoy did was fine, so long as he didn't get caught. If that is a reflection of the thinking in the opposition's camp, then I truly shudder to think what has become of our democracy, where rather than conducting an open debate about ideas, we'd rather influence the public's mood clandestinely. If yellow propaganda exists, and I've just indicated that it does, why did voters not fall for it in both 2016 or 2019? And what made them more susceptible to listen to counter narratives? Now, either the yellow forces are bad at communicating their message, or there's a genuine credibility gap that exists due to their poor record in office that permits other narratives to be more acceptable to the public. The message that the opposition seems to be pushing now is that it's the fear factor that's preventing people from expressing their true feelings when they are being surveyed by poll rating agencies on the president's performance. So, rather than giving him a low rating, oh, the fear factor is causing them to give him high ratings. Or that another message that they're spreading now is that Duterte does something outrageous like shutting down the Philippine Charity Sweepstakes Office operations to distract voters from the real issues, like what's happening in the West Philippine Sea. So again, if that were the case, and if Duterte were really a dictator, then his approval ratings should be closer to 100%, shouldn't they? The fact that of the matter is, even President Noy Aquino was popular until the very end of his term, even though some pent-up frustrations did exist. I'm sure an anonymous poll conducting body, which prides itself with independence, would be enough for people to respond honestly, don't you? And, this doesn't explain other results where polls indicate that the public take a different view to the governments on certain issues like the West Philippine Sea. Now, the opposition can't cherry pick the polls they like from the ones that they don't. They can't have it both ways, in my view. The argument that people don't respond honestly in public polls is somewhat akin to the Bobotante argument that voters are bobo. It doesn't give voters enough credit in either case. It also absolves the opposition of any responsibility. Surely, when a president's public satisfaction rating is assessed, this is done in relation not only to his recent performance, but also to what the alternative is. Yes, he may be flawed, but in contrast to what the other side does or offers, he might be the only game in town, for some. So instead of riding along with the president due to fear or intimidation, perhaps the public are willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because they feel there simply isn't a viable alternative. And that is an indictment on the opposition. It's at this point that I'd like to share with you a quote from none other than the late Senator Benigno Aquino Jr., which he made the year before he returned to the Philippines only to be assassinated. He said this, quote, "I know for a fact we cannot go back to the old society where a few enjoy the fat of the land and the many suffer. But today, the rich are getting richer and the poor are growing in numbers. That cannot be. The meaning of our struggle is to be able to return the freedom. First, you must return the freedom so that all segments of our community, whether from the left or from the right, will have the right to speak. And then, in that open debate, in that clash of debate in the marketplace, we will produce the clash between the thesis and the antithesis, and we will have the synthesis for the Filipino people. End of quote. So, what Ninoy is saying is that rather than matching black propaganda with your own black ops, perhaps what the opposition needs to do is to draw a different lesson on where they've strayed from that struggle that Ninoy was speaking about, to create an open society, one with open rather than closed debates, with open debates rather than clandestine ones. The second mistake that I believe the opposition is making as it draws lessons from the past is that they feel that they need to counter the public's perception of them as out of touch elitists by reaching out to the fringes of society rather than the broad middle class, or what I would call pandering to a narrow set based on social issues. This was Vice President Leni Robredo's formula for winning the vice presidency. Or was it? Did she really win? Is a question that is still being litigated at the Presidential Electoral Tribunal due to allegations of poll fraud made by her opponent, Bongbong Marcos. But anyway, whatever the case, Vice President Robredo went from virtual anonymity to coming within a whisker on the eve of the election, and may have actually clinched it. That should count for something. And it does. As the titular head of her party, the responsibility falls on her to guide it through this difficult period in opposition. It was her personal story as an attorney and advocate for the poor that endeared her to the masses. So why not steer the seemingly out-of-touch liberals to follow her lead? She quickly undertook her Angat Buhay program, which acts as a broker between charitable organizations and needy communities, helping people on the fringes or laylayan of society gain access to much-needed support. But this quickly morphed from an economic narrative to a social and cultural one, as she began to construct a coalition of groups on the fringe based on lifestyle choices. She started by picking up the cudgels for legalizing drugs as a counterweight to Duterte's anti-drugs campaign, which was heavy-handed. This found its way into the political manifesto of Ocho Derecho at the May polls through the Ahon Laylayan Coalition program, which she had her candidates sign. So from the economic fringes to those on the fringe of mainstream society, like the LGBTQI community, pro-abortion rights groups, and pro-legalization of drugs advocates. This was perhaps stoked by her Ateneo College think tank, which lent their program of government a kind of feminist slash leftist slash environmentalist slash liberal arts degree feel. This led them to be popular among woke millennials, educated and urban, but it didn't really offer anything much for the broad middle classes of society out there who were more concerned about bread and butter issues. The current emphasis on feminist and gay rights, legalization of drugs, makes the opposition look even more elitist and out of touch, quite frankly. Like a bunch of bespectacled, latte-sipping liberals with no idea how the other half lives. Now, to be fair, the enlightened, idealist college crowd can be very potent for you electorally. Mrs. Robredo is simply following in the footsteps of the late Senator Miriam Santiago and the late Senator Raul Rocco, another Bicolano, whose first campaign for president electrified the youth vote. But as we've seen in the past, there are limits to what this vote can achieve. To be successful, a broader coalition is always needed. So, rather than merely pandering to these narrow groups on the fringes, perhaps what the opposition needs to do is to turn its attention to the ordinary working families in the broad sections of our society. Now, the third mistake that I believe the opposition is making in drawing lessons from the past is that they feel they need to brand themselves as the party of human rights, in contrast to the heavy handedness of the government in its drug war or its conciliatory approach to China on the West Philippine Sea. This is the rights based approach to development. And this was perhaps why Ocho Derecho's bench consisted mainly of lawyers, talking about Erin Tanyada and Chel Joknyo, Romy Makalintal, their campaign manager Kiko Pangilinan, and the vice president herself. The contrast between Ocho's platform and that of Mabago Koto, the administration's, was quite stark. It isn't true that the last election wasn't about ideas. There were two theories of development clearly at play. On OD's side was a theory that said development happens when you give people their rights. Women, indigenous people, the young, gay, and so on. On the other side, Mabago Koto was emphasizing development through better services to the people, better infra, better access, better support, and better organization. That was their theory of change. OD focused on assembling a coalition of narrow, disparate groups. The administration focused on helping the broad sections of society, and by so doing, lifting all votes. The emphasis of OD on civil and political rights drowned out other narratives that one of their candidates, re-electionist Bam Aquino, had credibly developed around fostering entrepreneurship and innovation, which had an aspirational tone to it that could have played well to a broader audience had he been given the chance. But his message of optimism was lost in the posturing that Ocho Derecho did on things like the West Philippine Sea. This was clearly an opportunity lost. By losing BAM in the Senate, the opposition has lost more than a seat. It has lost a future contender for higher office. The vice president is now all alone as the sole contender, the sole possible contender in 2022. She seems vulnerable from her election protest case and with recent charges leveled at her by the government. But it seems the opposition continues to plod down this disproven strategy. Kiko Pangilinan's Magna Carta for commuters seeks to legislate rights for the riding public. The problem with this approach isn't that what people need are for their rights to be secured. The problem is the lack of investment in infrastructure, which the opposition opposes every time they question the government's loans from China. The Department of Finance has already shown through the brilliant work of Assistant Secretary Tony Lambino that adjusted for exchange rate expectations, China's loans to the Philippines are actually priced competitively when compared with Japanese and other lenders. And the Chinese loans don't account for the lion's share of the government's overseas borrowing program. So, Kiko's public consultation poses the question, bakit hassle mag-commute sa Pilipinas? To which he offers the solution to draw up a Magna Carta for the riding public. Now, this just plays into the administration's hands. The reason why it has been such a hassle to commute, it will argue, isn't due to the lack of rights, Senator Pangilinan. It's because of the broken promises that the previous government made, such as to extend the LRT to Cavite, or else the former president would allow himself to be run over by a train that didn't exist because the government failed to procure it properly on time, or that the train that won't run him over because it's broken down because the government fired the competent contractor and hired a newbie, know-nothing contractor to replace it. That's what it will argue. They'll argue that it's a hassle to commute because the PPPs or public-private partnerships of the previous administration never materialized by and large, except in the PowerPoint presentations they made. It's a hassle because the previous government wouldn't raise new taxes to pay for much-needed infrastructure. It's a hassle because the previous administration canceled a number of dredging contracts that could have prevented floods that clog up our streets. Now, this approach by Senator Pangilinan reveals a certain political tone deafness on the part of the opposition. If it feels it can win back voter confidence and trust by offering up paper rights that don't mean a thing because it ain't got that thing, then they certainly deserve to be where they are now. This is related to the opposition's stand on the West Philippine Sea issue. They claim to have won on the basis of a ruling at The Hague, which didn't settle the issue of sovereignty, but simply invalidated China's 9-line claim. The status of the rocks that China has built on was also settled. No, they aren't islands that any country can claim sovereignty over, nor do they create sovereign rights, the Hague Court ruled. The most one can claim is a 20 nautical mile radius surrounding them. So even the Hague concedes that China could perhaps claim that 20 nautical mile radius over the rocks on which it's built its structures on, over these contested waters. The opposition tries to fry the administration on this issue because it took a more conciliatory stand on this compared to the previous antagonistic stand which they favor. The Atin Yan campaign is a sign of Philippine nationalism which has led countries to go to war in the past and displays xenophobia at home. The so-called abandonment of this government's sovereignty over the islands? No, I don't think the government has abandoned its claim of the Spratlys at all. The government is conceding that it can't impose its sovereign rights while China is poised over there. There's a difference from claiming sovereignty and imposing sovereign rights. That, in essence, is the problem with this rights-based approach. You can't change facts on the ground by simply winning a court case or legislating rights. You have to make it happen. So unless the Philippines builds up its own naval assets over there, it can claim all it wants. But if China decides to throw its weight around, nothing, not even the United States, can stop it from doing so. But good fences make for good neighbors. So if the opposition wants us to preserve our rights in the West Philippine Sea, it needs to come up with better solutions than simply lodging complaints or taking China to court, to international courts which may have jurisdiction but don't have the ability to enforce their rulings. That's our job. So rather than legislating rights for every conceivable thing, for every interest group that exists, perhaps the opposition should get to work, drafting plans that would improve the lives of Filipinos by changing facts on the ground. I could go on, but in the interest of time, maybe I'll just leave it there for now. These three are what I believe are the wrong lessons that anyone could draw from the events of 2016 and 19. 1. Needing to go low when your opponent goes low. 2. Needing to pander to a narrow set of interests. And 3. Relying on unenforceable rights instead of changing facts on the ground. Why are they the wrong lessons? They're the wrong lessons because there's no admission of where they went wrong. No contrition. Like there was real anger in 2016, which still exists in 2019. But then they'll say, why was President Aquino so popular until the very end? Well, so was Bill Clinton. But his vice president, Al Gore, bore the brunt of people's frustrations with the Clintons. The same happened to Mar Rojas, one can argue. In part because of Mar Rojas, but also because there was pent-up frustration and anger, real palpable anger against the administration. The yellow forces at the time were perceived by voters as arrogant, hypocritical, and emitting clear signs of being a party that had been in power for too long. Their narrative seemed tired and dated. Voters had lost faith after Luneta, Yolanda, Mama Sapano, and felt they had given enough chances to the liberals. Nagsawa na, nadala na ang mga tao sa kanila. And so the lack of contrition on the opposition's part merely demonstrates to voters that they haven't learned a thing and can't be trusted with the reins. Not now, and possibly not ever, the way things are going. So will this condemn them to irrelevance in the future? Well, yes, if they continue down this path. Unless they learn the right lessons from history, they might be obliterated come 2022. So, what, you might ask, are the right lessons? I'd like to offer 5 of them, starting with number 1. First lesson: stop the scapegoating. Take responsibility for past mistakes. Show genuine contrition and remorse. For once, like just for once, I'd like to hear someone from the opposition say, yes, I acknowledge we made mistakes. Mistakes were made, we messed up big time, but now we're trying to correct them. We commit to never commit them again. We'll reform ourselves. I'd like to hear that. And probably so would so many others who have abandoned them simply because there's no admission on their part of any wrongdoing. I believe we Filipinos are a forgiving kind. If there is some contrition, some ownership of past mistakes that's demonstrated, I believe that that would go a long way towards assuaging the public's anger that still remains from previous failures committed by the previous administration. I mean, I speak to people all the time who tell me, I'm not really a political person, okay? But I just can't stand the hypocrisy of the Liberal Party. I just can't stand their hypocrisy. And so I can't help myself but wade in conversations and post things online against them because I just can't stand the messages that they're trying to foist on us. So that's the first lesson. The second one, practice what you preach. It's not enough to claim good governance and rule of law as our thing. You actually need to practice it. Stop using whataboutisms as an excuse. Duterte does this, his followers do that. So don't come to us complaining that we do this. What about them? Not us. So stop passing the blame, stop scapegoating, and practice what you preach. Do the right things. A corollary to this is, it's not enough to be good. You need to be effective too. As the group that espouses liberal democracy, they've historically taken hits from the left and the right. From the left, Joseph Estrada hit them for not doing enough to alleviate poverty. Because back then, the governments of Cory and Fidel Ramos were prioritizing debt repayments and opening up our borders to trade over social programs. Now, Pinoy addressed this by expanding social spending during his term. So they've addressed that issue. They've been hit from the right by emphasizing civil and political rights, but not protecting the community from criminal elements or from securing our borders or investing in much needed infrastructure. Being good should not prevent you from being effective. Follow what Ninoy said. Find the synthesis between the left and the right through open debate. Work with the administration on securing communities and protecting borders through practical but legal measures. Work with the administration to engage in prudent fiscal spending on the right kind of infrastructure that would boost our productivity and boost innovation in the country to create jobs and economic opportunity for all. That's the second. The third, give democracy a chance. Stop trying to unseat or topple a president before his or her term ends. It's ironic because they're supposed to be the pro-democratic forces. But the third lesson they need to draw is give democracy a chance. Stop calling voters bobo, for instance. Stop even implying that they're so gullible. Win the debate through open discussion, not through clandestine smear campaigns or through name-calling. The danger in claiming that it was black propaganda and troll armies that won Duterte the presidency is that it delegitimizes the election. And when you do that, you can lay the foundation for undoing its results. The opposition has gotten so used to the game of tearing down, first with Erap Estrada, then with Gloria Arroyo, and now with Duterte. But when they had a chance to rule, they stuffed it up in many ways. So it's time for the opposition. It's time for them to cease being the party of the resistance and start to accept the verdict of the people. which clearly repudiated their brand of politics and their governance style. It's time that they listened to the people who clearly want our leaders now to work together for the good of the country. That's the third. And the fourth is find a new economic narrative. BAMS was a crucial voice that was unfortunately lost at the last election. The Philippines is now making waves in a couple of surveys. First, the Startup Genome Project of 2019 reported that Manila's emerging fintech ecosystem is growing in size and prestige. The Global Innovation Initiative of the World IP Organization ranks the Philippines for the first time with other leading nations that punch above their weight as innovators. This will be aided by the enactment of the Philippine Startup Act, originally proposed by Bam Aquino, and the Philippine Innovation Act of Lauren Legarda. We can help the sectors being left behind, but we can't lose sight of the engines of future growth that will provide us with the means to help the vulnerable sectors. We can't stop disruption, but we can at least guarantee that we ride some of its waves. The opposition must find a new economic narrative that is broader, much more expansive, and optimistic about our future, rather than being pessimistic and sympathetic to the ones being left behind. We have the talent pool, after all, the creativity as a nation to compete globally. We've built an amazing platform with free education from kindy to tertiary, and with the universal healthcare law that's just been enacted. So, let's work on fiscal and other incentives to boost private investment, build infrastructure, and encourage research, innovation, collaboration, and investment. There's a new narrative there that can be woven. I'm just not sure that the opposition have the right people to capitalize on it now. And finally, number 5, reach out. Broaden your appeal. Stop living in your echo chamber. Stop insulting people, lumping everyone critical of you as a bunch of deplorables. Hate to say this, but Chris Aquino may be their last remaining hope. Chris Aquino. Oh my God, I can't believe I've gone there. Yes, Chris, who took a more conciliatory approach with the administration, both before and after the elections of 2016 and 19. She's been lambasted for it, of course, by the opposition. But she seems to have a better feel for the pulse of the nation than any of the Liberal Party stalwarts. If Ninoy was able to reach out to President Marcos after being jailed by him for nearly 8 years, then the opposition should be able to reach out to Duterte and his ilk. And Chris shows the way. So I guess we'll have to leave it there. Please send me your comments in the space below. I'd love to hear from you. This has been another edition of The Cusp. Thanks for watching. I'm Doy Santos. Talk to you soon.